The room was silent, except for the soft cries of a newborn. Nurses rushed around, but something was wrong. The millionaire's baby, born into luxury, screamed and kicked at everyone who tried to hold him. Every nanny quit within days, every doctor failed to calm him. His wealthy father called it a curse. His mother wept behind closed doors, wondering if her son would ever know peace or love. But fate had its own plan. The day a tired black maid walked into the mansion, holding nothing but kindness in her eyes, the impossible happened. The crying stopped. The baby smiled for the very first time, and the whole house froze. It was the most lavish home in the city. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and silence heavy with sadness. The millionaire, Richard Collins, had built his empire from dust. But inside his grand mansion, he faced the one thing his money couldn't fix: his newborn son, Ethan. Ethan's cries echoed through every corridor, piercing through every luxury. No one could hold him for more than a minute. The moment anyone touched him, he screamed, kicked, and flailed like he was in pain. Doctors said he was perfectly healthy. Psychologists said he was emotionally unbonded. But to his parents, it felt like punishment, a curse that no amount of wealth could lift. One by one, the nannies left, some in tears, some terrified. "That baby isn't normal," one whispered before quitting. Richard grew colder, blaming his wife for hiring incompetent people. His wife, Elena, just sat quietly in the nursery, her makeup ruined from nights of no sleep. Then, one morning, their housekeeper introduced someone new, a middle-aged black maid named Martha. She didn't have fancy clothes or impressive degrees, just warmth, patience, and eyes that had seen too much of life. When she entered the baby's room, everyone waited for the usual: the cries, the chaos, the rejection. But instead, silence. The baby's tiny fists relaxed. His cries turned into soft breaths, and then, a sound no one had heard before, a small laugh. Richard stood frozen. Elena covered her mouth in shock. Martha gently smiled and whispered, "He's not broken. He just needs love that listens." It was the first calm moment in months, and the beginning of something that would change every life in that mansion forever. From that day on, the mansion felt different. The tension that once haunted every corner began to soften, replaced by something warm, something alive. Martha didn't treat Ethan like a fragile, spoiled heir. She talked to him like he was human. Every morning she'd hum old gospel tunes while cleaning his nursery. The baby would giggle, waving his tiny arms as if conducting the melody. Elena would often peek through the door, tears forming in her eyes. For the first time she saw her son happy, at peace. But not everyone was happy about it. The other staff whispered behind Martha's back. "She's just a maid," one scoffed. "Probably just got lucky once," said another. And Richard, the millionaire, couldn't understand it. "I pay doctors thousands, and she walks in with a song and fixes him?" His pride burned like a quiet fire. One night, Richard decided to test her. He called Martha into his office. The room smelled of whiskey and old anger. "Martha," he said sternly, "tell me how you did it. What trick did you use?" She looked at him with calm eyes. "No tricks, sir. Babies don't need tricks. They need truth." Her words hit him harder than any insult. Richard leaned back, scoffing. "Truth? You think love fixes everything?" Martha smiled softly. "No, sir. But love teaches us how to fix ourselves." From that moment, Richard watched her closely. Every interaction, every word, every gentle touch with his son. The baby adored her, laughed only for her. At first, it made him angry. Then, ashamed. One afternoon, while Elena hosted guests, Martha took Ethan out to the garden. The air was warm, filled with the scent of roses and sunlight. She sat under a tree, humming as Ethan reached for her necklace, a small cross worn smooth from years of touch. "You like that, baby?" she whispered. "It's a reminder that every soul is born to be loved, no matter the color of their skin." But as she spoke, one of the guests, a woman in pearls and arrogance, saw them through the window. She gasped, calling out, "Elena, do you know your maid is sitting on the grass with your child?" Within moments, the scene turned ugly. The guests stared, whispering about improper behavior. Richard rushed out, his face red with embarrassment. "Martha, that's enough. You're overstepping." Martha stood, holding the baby gently. "He was crying, sir." The earth calms him. "Elena!" Richard snapped. "Get the child. She's not to handle him like that." The baby began to cry again. Loud, frantic, terrified. Martha's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. She placed Ethan carefully in Elena's arms, bowed her head, and walked away. That night the baby screamed for hours. No lullaby worked. No medicine helped. Richard buried his head in his hands, realizing the silence had left with her. Finally, Elena whispered, "We need her, Richard. Not just for him. For us." For the first time, the millionaire's pride broke. He nodded quietly. The next morning, Richard went to Martha's small quarters near the servant wing. She was packing her bag. "I was going to leave, sir," she said softly. "Didn't want to cause trouble." Richard's voice cracked. "Please, stay. My son needs you." Martha looked at him, her eyes full of grace. "Your son needs his father's heart." "I'll stay. But not for your money, sir. I'll stay to teach you what he already knows, that love has no color, and peace has no price." It was a lesson Richard never forgot. Weeks passed. The mansion slowly became quieter, softer, alive in ways it never had been before. Martha's laughter filled the halls like sunlight after years of shadow. Ethan thrived under her care. He began to crawl, to babble, to reach for her whenever she entered the room. Even the once cold marble floors seemed to echo with warmth. But the day that changed everything came unexpectedly. It was a bright Sunday morning. The family had guests, wealthy investors, business partners, and society's finest. Elena wore her pearls, Richard his polished pride, and in the middle of the living room, baby Ethan rested in his crib, surrounded by expensive gifts and polite smiles. Then, without warning, the baby started crying. A deep, pained cry, not of hunger but of fear. Elena tried to soothe him, but the more she rocked him, the louder he screamed. The guests began to whisper. Richard's face reddened. "Someone take him upstairs," he ordered. But Ethan's tiny hands clung to the air, reaching, not for his parents, but for her. Martha stood silently by the doorway, her eyes full of calm sorrow. Richard saw it, and his pride tightened his throat. "No," he muttered. "Not now. Not in front of them." But when Ethan's cries turned into gasps, panic filled the room. His small chest heaved, his skin flushed red. "He can't breathe!" Elena screamed. In that instant, everyone froze, except Martha. She rushed forward, pushing through the crowd. "Move!" she shouted, her voice full of command. "He's choking." Without hesitation, she lifted the baby, tilting his head gently, patting his back with practiced hands. The guests watched in horror and awe as she whispered, soothing words, not in English, but in an old African lullaby filled with rhythm and love. A moment later, the baby coughed. A weak, fragile sound, then let out a clear cry. Gasps filled the room. Ethan's tiny arms reached for Martha's neck, clinging to her like she was his world. And then came the sound, not from Ethan, but from Richard, a broken, quiet sob. He turned away, his shoulders shaking. The guests fell silent. The powerful millionaire, known for his iron will and pride, was crying in front of everyone. When the room emptied, Richard stood before Martha, his voice trembling. "You saved my son again." Martha looked at him gently. "No, sir. He saved you." Richard blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" She smiled softly, placing a hand over her heart. "That little boy reminded you what love feels like. You just forgot what it looked like on darker skin." The words hit him harder than any truth he'd ever faced. His entire life, the business, the pride, the walls he'd built, all crumbled in that moment. Tears fell freely now. "Martha," he whispered, "I've been blind." Martha took his trembling hands in hers. "You were never blind, sir. You just refused to see." Elena stood nearby, wiping her tears. "Martha," she said, her voice breaking, "you're not just his caretaker. You're family." That evening, the three of them sat, together by the fireplace, the baby sleeping, peacefully in Martha's arms, The flicker of the fire danced across their faces. One black, one white, and one pure and innocent in between. It was no longer a house divided by status or color. It was a home, built on the courage of one woman who dared to love without barriers. Outside, the snow began to fall softly, like forgiveness from heaven itself. And for the first time, Richard whispered the words he'd never said before. "Thank you for teaching me what humanity truly means." Martha smiled. "That's all I ever wanted you to learn, sir." The camera would fade on the image of her holding Ethan close, the firelight glinting off her cross, a symbol of faith, love, and a bond that broke the chains of prejudice forever. The winter melted into spring, and with it, the mansion changed, not in structure but in soul. The halls that once echoed with silence now carried laughter, songs, and the gentle hum of life. Martha's presence was no longer that of a maid's shadow. It was a light that everyone followed. Ethan grew stronger each day. His first word wasn't "mama" nor "papa." It was a soft, joyful sound. "Mar, the." Elena cried when she heard it. Even Richard, who once measured worth in wealth, felt something break inside him, a chain that had been there all his life. For the first time, he saw Martha not as a servant, but as a guardian angel who had walked into his life, wearing an apron instead of wings. One evening, Richard called a family meeting. Martha stood nervously in front of him, hands folded, unsure why she'd been summoned. The air was still, the sunset bathing the room in golden light. "Martha," Richard began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "you've been more to this family than any of us have ever admitted. You've given my son love when I gave him distance. You've taught me humility when I lived in pride." He took a deep breath and opened a small velvet box on the table. Inside lay a golden locket, engraved with Ethan's name. "This," he said softly, "belongs to you, because no matter what the world says, you are part of this family, and I will never let anyone treat you as less again." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She trembled as she held the locket. "Sir, I don't deserve—" But Elena stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "You deserve more than we could ever repay." For a moment, the world stood still. Three souls from different walks of life, bound by something pure, love. But Martha wasn't a woman who needed riches or praise. She had seen too much of the world's cruelty to believe in gold and diamonds. All she ever wanted was respect, and now she had it. In the weeks that followed, Richard made changes that shocked everyone. The mansion's staff were given fair wages, health insurance, and education funds for their children. He began visiting communities he had ignored for years, donating not for headlines, but for healing. When asked why, he simply said, "I used to think money defined power. Then I met a woman who showed me that kindness is the only real currency." Martha stayed with the family for many more years. Ethan grew into a young man, strong, compassionate, and unashamed to call Martha his second mother. Every year on her birthday, he gave her a single white rose, the same color as her maid's uniform, now transformed into a symbol of purity, love, and dignity. And when she eventually passed away, peacefully in her sleep, the entire mansion, every worker, every guest, even Richard himself, stood by her grave. The inscription on her tombstone read, "Here lies Martha Johnson, the woman who taught a house to love." As the camera fades out, we see Ethan, now a grown man, standing by her grave, holding the same golden locket she once wore. He opens it, revealing two pictures, one of baby Ethan in her arms, and one of her smiling, eyes full of light. He whispers softly, "Because of you, I learned that love has no color." The wind carries his words into the distance, merging with the golden glow of sunset, a reminder that compassion, once planted in a cold heart, can bloom for generations. The screen fades to black with these final words on screen. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. But she changed everything. With love,